Welcome to the Do Good X podcast, a sanctuary from the entrepreneurial grind. Hosts Kimberly Danielle and Stephen Lewis, advocates for impactful entrepreneurship, guide you on the path where purpose meets business. Join us to slow down, reconnect, and explore the challenges of under-resourced entrepreneurs, uncovering the unique journey of building businesses that make a difference. Now, your hosts, Kimberly Danielle and Stephen Lewis.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Do Good X podcast. My name is Kimberly Danielle, and I am a co-host. I am also a community builder, a communication strategist, and a coach who comes from generations of faith-driven entrepreneurs who believe that our purpose should drive us to contribute to the common good. And I am so excited about this episode today. Stephen, let the good people know what we have going on today.
Yes. It's good to be with you today, Kimberly. As co-host, I am Stephen Lewis. I'm a catalyst for positive change in communities and business. And for over 2 decades, I have inspired leaders and entrepreneurs to live and work on purpose with intention, with faith, and commitment to the well-being. And I am also excited, Kimberly, for our conversation guest today, who is Nipun Mehta. If you don't know him, and after you hear this podcast, look this brother up, because he has done so much and is just a poster child for all good things and acts of kindness. Nipun is the founder of ServiceSpace, which is a global community working at the intersection of technology, volunteerism, and a gift culture. Now, as a designer of large-scale social movements that are rooted in small acts of kindness and service that are powered by micro movements of inner transformation, his work has uniquely catalyzed many-to-many networks of community builders grounded in their local communities and rooted in practice and cultivating compassion. More recently, ServiceSpace's pandemic response showcased the beauty of its agile ecosystem. Today, ServiceSpace reaches millions every month and is powered by the thousands of volunteers and blossoms into ever expanding local and virtual service projects that aim to ignite a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The Nipun was honored as an unsung hero of compassion by the Dalai Lama not long before the former U.S. President Obama appointed him to the Council of Addressing Poverty and Equity in the U.S. And yet, the core of what strikes anyone who meets him is the way his life is, and he attempts to bring a smile in the world and silence in his heart. And what he's always said, that I want to live simply, to love purely, and to give fearlessly. That's me. I spent a few days with Nipun last year, and then at the top of this year. And let me tell you, he is a man of his words, and he is definitely an embodiment of kindness and service and inner transformation. You are in for a treat today. So Nipun, it's good for you to be here with us today.
Oh, I am so happy. I'm beaming. My heart is smiling just because I'm in the company of both of you. And because I know you stand for all the same values that I also stand for. And I think it's just kind of lifts your heart up, when you're in the company of kindred spirits. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. I want to ask you, your mission in life is to bring a smile into the world and stillness in my own heart. That's what you've said. And so how has your life mission shaped and informed the birth and the development of ServiceSpace?
Well, I think for me, it does come down to kindness. I remember many years ago, many years ago now, I was a teenager once. I had hair once upon a time on my head. And I remember one of my buddies from kindergarten, he'd gotten a little motorbike and he was taking me around and he was showing off and we were going fast, and I was like, look, man, I don't think if you go any faster, I'm going to throw up, and he was like, no, man, you American stomach, you're Indian, man. We don't do it. We don't, and we were just fooling around, a couple of teenagers. And then he just kept going faster and faster. And then I was like, dude, I'm going to throw up. And I threw up. And here you have these two awkward looking teenagers just confused what to do. And, what was really inspiring is that this random gentleman just stopped. And he was on a bicycle. He saw the two of us looking pretty confused. And he got down, he went to a vendor, he took out a lemon from his bag, and he gave me half a lemon. But what was interesting about it, and of course, the citrus is going to make you feel good when you're nauseated. But what was most striking about it, which didn't hit me at that point, but much later, is that he didn't even stop to get a thank you from me. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't want to thank you back in return. He just did it because he's like, here's another brother in need. Let me help him. And what struck me also was that he gave me half a lemon and he kept the other half. And I realized that maybe a lemon was all he could afford. And I have since then known many people like that. And he gave me half of what he had. And he didn't want anything in return. And so I look at that and I say, when I grow up, I want to be a giver like that. I want to be a giver that doesn't want anything in return, that just gives for the sake of giving because we share this deep human connection. And so I think for me, my life has been an experiment to attempt to live in that way. And ServiceSpace has been an offshoot of that process. So we started in 1999 with that same spirit, man. Let's just step it up. For me, I love a good challenge. I used to be an athlete growing up and like always trying to push, but push in what direction? I think the hardest thing to do with kindness is to like actually trust in the deeper reciprocity of the universe and not just want something immediately back. And that's a process, initially it feels good to get stuff in return. And I think where the kind of creative, I don't know, maybe genius is too strong a word, but the creative constraints of ServiceSpace is probably its deepest genius, because it codified and it operationalized this intent. So it's one thing to have it individually as Nipun and Kimberly and Stephen, but another to do it collectively at scale. And to do it collectively, you have to have some shared agreements. And so we had those three creative constraints. Man, just work with heart. So no transaction, no paid staff, all volunteers was number one. Second one, like just trust in the universe, trust in the deeper arcs of reciprocity. And so no fundraising. And the third one, don't even try to sell your impact. Like forget about big impact in the world, small acts. So you put all these together and you're like, what do you have? That's sort of a codified way to say, hey man, just give for the love of it, and see what happens. And maybe, everybody used to always say, oh, this is childish and tell us when you grow up, but I think I'm now bald and I can now say with confidence that, man, this thing called love, it's real and the universe is alive.
It's so beautiful to be in your presence because you embodied that. And I know you're talking about not just at the individual level, your hope has been to translate that to a community level. It really is contagious because I've seen you engage in these acts of kindness, and then kindness just follows you, not with any expectation, but it just follows you in return. And then it passes on to the next person and to the next person. So I think that's absolutely beautiful. I want to ask you a question related to what you shared about its volunteer run. So ServiceSpace is powered and led by volunteers. I want you to share a little bit more about this business model and how it disrupts the field of business, really, and provides an alternative approach to entrepreneurship. And I mean, for you all who are listening in, when I say volunteer power, when Nipun says volunteer powered, there are no full-time staff members, right? No full-time team members.
Yeah.
So can you share more about that?
Yeah. And I'm sure listeners are like, well, why the heck is this guy on a podcast? You know, like volunteers, like, what do you got, man? What's the capacity here you're talking about? Well, the thing for me that has always baffled me is if you look at nature and what nature rewards kindness. Nature doesn't reward transaction. Nature doesn't reward accumulation. So if I get $1 million and it's sitting in my pocket, like the kind of reward mechanisms that nature has don't get triggered. But if I do an act of kindness, I mean, this is Michael Norton's research at Harvard. He went to people and he said, look, I'm going to give you some money. You can do two things. You can spend it on yourself, go to a mall, buy something, or you can give it to a stranger. And the moment you give it to a stranger, even if you're a skeptic in your mind, the moment you give it to a stranger, you get rewarded with all this dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and all these endorphins, right? And you're like, wow, why is nature rewarding me for doing an act of kindness? And if it is rewarding me, why don't we have institutions that are actually built in alignment with nature? Right? What we are saying is, I'm going to be toxic, and to cover up that toxicity, I'm going to give you a market reward. And so you can be like, well, yeah, it was worth it because I got to go buy a few things. I put up with all this toxicity so I could buy a few things and get security. And we created a whole game around that. But there's a much bigger game, a much more infinite game in town. And that's love. And nature totally rewards that. And so you look at that and you say, why the heck don't we have systems that actually tap into this labor of love, that actually multiply it, that regenerate it? And what happens to the collective effect? So it's one thing for me to be in that space in me. And it's one thing for you to be in that space in you. But what happens when we do it together in a shared space? Like, is there a regenerative function? And there absolutely is. And so how do we start to innovate in this direction? But I think we've been too decapacitated by the market stories and the market norms, which clearly aren't working for everybody. Like, we know that. And we still play these zero-sum games and we say, oh, like, let's go out and get, it's like if one funder is giving money and you and I are both competing for it, even if I win, you lose, right? Like, and there's got to be a better way. Like, we got to be able to find a better party, And so I happen to think that, like, this is the better party, man. We all win. And we all win by not playing these narrow, finite games. So for ServiceSpace, it's been an experiment. And initially, when you look at it, you think, oh, well, this is a lemonade stand. Like, what's the big deal? Why do we have this guy on a podcast, man? It's like, because my kids know this, and actually all of us probably knew this when we were kids. In fact, Gandhi would, when he's asked, where do you go to learn the law of love? He said, I go to little children. And so in so many ways, we all have it, but then we sort of society conditions that out of us, it beats it out of us. And then we get caught up in different narratives. And I think it's time to upgrade or downgrade, however you look at it, like go back to the roots, so to speak, and reconnect. So we've been experimenting in this direction. And I think initially, so many years, everybody would be like, so what do you do? I'm like, well, I volunteer. And they're like, no, really, man, what do you really do? And I'm like, no, man, I really volunteer. It's like what you do for your job is all somehow like significant. And what you do for giving is somehow like secondary. And I would say at the least, we should flip that order And at the most, we should just be like, yeah, oh, what I do? Yeah, that's like toothpaste. Like, yeah, nobody comes and says, hey, Kimberly, what kind of toothpaste do you have? Do you have enough for the rest of your life? It's toothpaste, man. It's not a conversation piece. And I think we need to look at our transactional market driven stories in that way and look at our character, our values, our heart as the primary story, something we lead every day with, every moment with. So we've been trying to push at that, by being the change, not in any aggressive way, not in a right or wrong way, but just like, hey, we're a bunch of kids, man. Go ahead, dude. We don't know any better. We're just going to try. And, if we fail, please, on my epitaph, you can write that here died a man who was recklessly generous. I'm good with that, man. I'm good. So yeah, we've been doing a lot of different experiments for the last 25 years in this direction. And I think initially it was sounded like a bunch of well-meaning folks. Then it was like, oh, there's the collective intelligence in such a space is very different. So if you put like 1,000 staff people together, forget 1,000, even if you put 100 staff people together in one place, and you say, let's dream something up, you would get, a bunch of really cool things. And a lot of innovation has come from those market-driven spaces. But you put a bunch of I don't know, Dr. Kings and Gandhis and Mother Teresas of the world together who are just moved by love. And you put 100 of them, and not just larger than life famous people, but everyday heroes, right? People that you may not have heard of in such grand ways, like Ruby Bridges, like what? She's 6 years old, man. And she's like, oh, I don't hate those guys that are throwing stuff at me, don't want me to go to school. She's saying, I was actually praying for them. And I'm like, wow, like if that's not the law of love, right? But even if she didn't become famous, like how do you, if you had like a whole bunch of people coming together with that spirit, like what is the ceiling of that? And I think we haven't explored that as humanity. And so I think that's what we've been doing in ServiceSpace. So initially it sounded like a small, experiment, but then as it started to scale up, the kind of intelligence and the kind of innovations and the kind of ripple effect that we saw was something that you just cannot replicate with transactional mindsets. And so I feel very lucky at a personal level, even if I died today. Like I feel lucky that I've gained so much confidence in that law of love that has been eternal, but just its presence is kind of a little diminished in our world today.
So it's interesting to hear you talk about that, Nipun, in the sense that, nature responds to and rewards love. I mean, can you think about building a business with a business model based on love? I heard this poet, Jaya Johns, who said, people ask, so what do you do for a living? He says, I love. And if more of us could do that. So you remind me of that in the ways in which I think I've heard you say, in the beginning, we were looking for 40 hours of commitment. And we could have gone out and hired somebody to work 40 hours. But it's like, what if we get 40 people that could just donate an hour of their time out of love? And so I think that's very instructive and fascinating and so alternative to like what we actually see in the marketplace. And so I'm curious about, how does nature respond to and reward, or at least work with, AI and generative AI? As you look at, how this is increasingly coming on the scene, people, communities, organizations could use it for good, but not always doing that. But yet you at ServiceSpace, you've been experimenting with AI bots and compassion AI. And so can you share, what sparked those experiments? Why are you doing that? And how are those expressions of what you've been talking about as it responds to nature and love, and how we can learn from those types of things as it even relates to working with AI?
Yeah. I mean, at some level, I used to be a computer scientist way back in the days, and I try to, I don't think I can beat it out of my system. And so at some level, ServiceSpace has always worked at the intersection of, computing power, which is technology, community, which is, human beings, social interactions, and these eternal values like compassion, right? So if you look at computing, community, and compassion, and you say, well, how do we find the center of it? And so we started by building websites for nonprofits, and then we proceeded on to so many other things online as well. But in 2017, we used to run this portal called Daily Good. We still do. It sends out a little bit of good news every day. And at some point in 2017, we created this bot, and we had a demo of it. We were like, wouldn't it be cool if you could like put all the news stories of CNN or any other news source or all the news sources, and this machine could, or this bot or this intelligence could tell us input is a story, output is like a compassion score, right? Like, how compassionate is this story? Is this something that polarizes you, or is this something that actually brings people together? And so we had a demo of that, and we were like, oh, that would be cool. And then, of course, ChatGPT, kind of GPT 3.5 particularly, came out, and everyone's talking about all this. And that was a pretty major innovation. But, how are we going to use this innovation? And it's, left to its own devices, market AI is just going to automate the status quo. And the status quo doesn't work for everybody, right? We know that. And so if we just get excited about it because it's going to create, more capacity in certain vertical domains, I don't think that's the best that we can do. I think we have to look at it in a much broader lens. And I think it is a force. I think Sundar Pichai at Google said, this is a force that's stronger than, or he says it will have more profound implications than the invention of fire or electricity. And I think he's right. I mean, I think it's going to disrupt everything in society. And it's doing it at such an alarming pace. Like with social media, we were blindsided, and this is like way faster than any of those previous innovations, and way more subversive. And so if we, so I think people of heart, people of values, people who are not just moved by personal benefit, have to go into this mud and ask the hard questions. And we have to kind of struggle with it and say, well, how are we going to navigate this ship? Can we tilt the arc of it? Can we bend the arc, as Dr. King might say, towards alternative possibilities that are in the blind spot of the market momentum? And I think there's a lot of reasons to look at those risks in that way, but equally, there's a lot of reasons to engage. Like, I think heartful, conscious, faith-based people need to embrace it, because we can't be laggards. You want to actually leapfrog. So the thing we've been thinking about, the way we're looking at AI, is, I think, so if you consider the example of a microscope, right? Like, you and I may not be aware of the cellular level of what's going on in our bodies, right? But a microscope helps you kind of be in integrity at that deeper level, and we call that health. Similarly, a telescope is going to give you this great insight into the cosmos, and you can align with those weather patterns and with all the different nuances that affect our daily life, even though you're not aware of it, right? So tools help us be in deeper integrity. So can AI be a force to create an inner scope, right? And into our minds, into not just inner scope in that way, but also an interscope, because you realize that no mind is in isolation. It's always connected with other minds. And if we can do that, can it actually help us untangle ourselves from all these multipolar traps that humanity seems to be stuck in? And I think if you just look at like the market momentum and just say, oh my God, it's just going to do this way better, way faster, way more creatively. Yes, but I don't think that's going to add a different dimension to us. So I think it's actually just going to accelerate the problems. But I think if we can use it in a different way, then I think we might be able to bring out a new dimension, this inner dimension. And I think that inner dimension, when it combines with the external dimension, all dimensions are better off because of it. So I think it's very important to embrace these very rapidly moving, subversive, and dangerous in some ways innovations, and see if we can provide a different narrative, see if we can build it around different shared agreements. I think it's possible, and we're trying.
So we are going to move into our resource roundup, and here I'm going to build off of what you just shared, Nipun. And during our resource roundup, we explore various tools and resources that will equip and support underrepresented entrepreneurs, especially as they build their businesses. And so, speaking of kind of this inner scope and leveraging AI, generative AI, and ways for good versus what it can help, move things faster and maybe further along in a particular way. What 1 to 2 resources would you recommend to founders, especially tech founders, leveraging generative AI, who want to approach their business with more compassion and generosity, with a focus on community?
Yeah, I'm going to give you an off the wall answer on this, Kimberly, if I'm allowed.
You are allowed.
I would go to a tech entrepreneur and I would say, go and do an act of kindness to start. Ground yourself in that reality, because I think what AI is going to be amazing at is going to be far greater than individual intellectual quotient, the IQ. There is no way we're going to be able to compete with AI. But AI cannot include heart intelligence, right? And there is no way, even if we have artificial general intelligence or artificial super intelligence, which is on deck in a few years, it will be far inferior to collective heart intelligence. And so I would say the biggest resource is our humanity. That if you are gonna engage with AI, you could think in terms of cost benefit analysis in the short term, and say, oh my God, it takes you 5 staff to do this. I could do this with with the snap of a finger. And that's true. You could, and you will be able to increasingly do more and more things like that. But I think the deeper design question is, what are you actually trying to solve in the broader margin goal? Right? Where exactly you're a founder of a company, you have a certain mission, you want to be sustainable. That's good. That's fine. But ultimately, like, what is the benefit to humanity that you are seeing, and how do you work backwards from there, and draw a through line to the narrow goals? Not like the other way. Not say, hey, I want to start here. Once I get all my ducks in order, then I'll think about the greater good. I would say that think about the broader margin goals first, and then go here. And I would say that keeping the human at the center, keeping the heart at the center, is very important as you navigate all of this. Google yesterday announced Google Overview, right? Like, so you go to Google search, and it's just going to give you, you no longer have to click on 10 links and synthesize it. It's going to synthesize all these answers. So you could go to Google today and say, create a 21-day, vegetarian meal plan for me. And it's going to analyze everything. And so that's true and good. But like when I say, oh, Google, like, who are the best givers you know of? It's going to give you the Warren Buffetts and the Bill Gates of the world. It's not going to give you that guy in the slum community who says, hey, man, I may or may not have food today, but I always feed the birds on that tree because my great grandfather used to do that. And this is who we are. Like, to him, that giving is much more important than even his own existence. And this is a real story, somebody I know. And that's not going to show up on Google. And so if you're just going to automate, there's like a lot of theories of change that we're completely bypassing through this kind of momentum. So as tech founders with heart, with faith in a deeper narrative, you have to go in and ask and say, well, I can make this faster. I can make this, I can increase a lot of capacity in this way. I can be a lot more creative even. But what values are you really trying to propagate? To think about that, not as an afterthought, but as a forethought. To lead with that, to continue to keep that in the center, and to end with that, it would be my hope, especially people in your community. I think those are the folks that will do that. So I would say that's my off the wall. It's not like, hey man, go to this because this stuff is moving so fast. So even if you say go to this resource or that resource, it's like, yeah, like next month it's going to be a whole different ballgame. And so we're just able to do so much. Like you can type something and it just creates videos based on that. You can, with 3 seconds of someone's voice, you can just create a whole clip. There's this incredible website called Infinite Conversation. I mean, this is a year old, and in AI time, that's like ancient. But a year ago, you had this German philosopher, this German filmmaker, and this Slovenian philosopher, and they both have huge corpuses of their information. And AI is just generating all kinds of content. And it's in their voice, and they're actually talking to each other. And this was a year ago. And now, 2 days ago, OpenAI has just released something where this multimodal AI, their latest model, GPT-4o, and where like my AI can talk to your AI, like literally your phone and my phone talk to each other, and they sing songs and complete each other's lyrics. They have a demo of this that they just put out 2 days ago. And so it's kind of amazing, and it's kind of awe-inspiring, and there's a little bit of terror embedded in it as well. But I would say that people of faith, right, founders who are leading with heart, have to go in there and ask different questions. They have to say, okay, both of those things are there, but how will I bend the arc? And I think I love entrepreneurs, because they're not looking to manage the current pie, right? Like they are actually looking to broaden the pie, but broaden the pie in which direction? And I think this is where you have to ask that question. So I would say, go out, do an act of kindness. The greatest resource we have is our heart. Is not our heads, is not our ideas. AI is going to be able to do all that for us. But our greatest resource is our heart. And so that little act of kindness, it sounds so simple. It sounds almost silly to be here on a podcast and be like, it's not this website or that website. But it's actually like just going out and doing something and seeing what is the intelligence that's activated in your entire apparatus, like in your entire being. And how do I marry that wisdom and that aliveness, as Howard Thurman would say, just do what the world needs most are people who have come alive in that way. How do I marry that with my product, with my company, with my business, and achieve all the narrow margin goals? So lead with that first.
Well, as people, I'm not surprised to hear you say that.
Is that allowed, Stephen?
It is. But let me ask you, for those who do want to jump in, entrepreneurs who do want to jump in, is there a tool that use generative AI that they should be paying attention to as they think about their own entrepreneurial endeavors, even though the landscape is changing rapidly?
I would say if you have no experience, I would say just go to ChatGPT, ask a question, ask hard questions. If you want to get a little bit more mind blown, go check out, there's some of their tools like Sora, or image generating tools like Midjourney, where you can type something and say, create, like I did this for my wife. I say, sometimes when she wakes up, I'll send her a funny text message or something. And so I said, create an image that's happy, rosy, peachy, and it's a good morning image, and I described it in like 2 sentences, and it created like a completely original image. And then I said, well, like that looks too fake. Make it in Van Gogh style, because she's a fan of Van Gogh, and it did it. And I got a lot of brownie points from my wife that morning. But play with that, and play with some of the music tools that are out there as well. That you can actually create some really cool, add some really original, cool music with very little overhead. So as you experiment with text, with audio, with video, with creativity, music, art, I think we'll see a different possibility of what's really, what is possible. And I think underneath it will beg the question of what does it mean to be human? Like, what is the unique human value add? And that, if we can marry these capacities with the unique human value add, I think that would be a real win for humanity.
So acts of kindness, and then you all got various tools to go and explore, but do them both at the same time. And if you're listening in and you want to access more resources to help build your business for good, you can go to dogoodx.org. And here you can join our Do Good X LinkedIn community, where we share resources, tips, and tools. We'll take some of what Nipun shared and share it there as well, to provide entrepreneurs and change makers with a community of support. So we hope to see you there. So thank you for joining us, Nipun. It has been a gift. It always is a gift. And so grateful for that hallway conversation about Howard Thurman, about acts of kindness and generosity and compassion and Martin Luther King and all the things that led to this continued relationship and conversation. I'm grateful for you and the work you're doing in the world.
Oh, likewise, Kimberly. You are such a radiant human being. It's hard not to just be like, hey, man, I want to know the story behind that smile. And Stephen, I feel like he's a brother from another mother, as they say. We've got the Howard Thurman and Gandhi connection going. Both of you are a blessing for me in my life, and I'm sure in so many others. And I just feel elevated whenever I'm around you guys, and grateful that the grace of life has brought our journeys together. And hopefully we can continue to do greater good in the world. So I'm thankful for your friendship.
Likewise. We're thankful.
Yeah.
We're thankful. And, this has been a enriching experience and conversation today. And I hope that the listeners are able to appreciate the fullness of our time together today. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Do Good X podcast. To continue the conversation or access our resources, visit www.dogoodx.org. Join us again for conversations that will nourish your soul, ignite your dreams, and empower you to build an impactful business, one intentional step at a time. Until then, keep striving, thriving, and doing good.